All right, everybody, come on in and find your seat. Jay, I do want to say that there's officially now at least double the amount of people here than 2 weeks ago when I preached. I just want you to know that I noticed that. Thanks, appreciate it. Tonight, you have the pleasure of hearing from Reverend Jay Hanson. Jay Hanson is a longtime pastor here in our conference. He planted the church, the chapel, over in Brunswick, and has been serving there for, 100 years, something like that. A very long time, 19 years. So. The chapel on August the 20th was one of 62 other churches who voted to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. Jay pastors that church, is going to speak to a little bit of their journey and also his decision to become an elder in the Global Methodist Church. So if you're unfamiliar with any of those things, what you should hear is that Jay brings a traditionalist viewpoint. The purpose of these town halls is not to debate views, but to understand and hear views. And so Jay will be presenting the traditionalist side of things, his take on that. September the 11th, we'll have another speaker here. That meeting will be at 6 o'clock because that speaker has further to go. He's got to come from Savannah. So we'll be an hour later on September the 11th, okay? And he'll have more of a progressive view of things. We do have something there for you on the screen. If you have a question you would like to ask, just text it to me. I'm keeping them here on my iPad, and somebody said, well, what if you don't text? Well, you could bring like Fran Purrier and bring me your essay. Or you can come to the back and visit with me and make sure that I understand your question, okay? And I wasn't knocking you, Fran. I'm glad you came prepared, very prepared. So the only rules of engagement here are that we're here to listen and learn and to understand and to love each other even through differences of opinion. So if you have questions, text them on or come back there and see me. Jay's going to present a little bit, talk a little bit, and then I'll bring up the questions, okay? Would y'all welcome Jay Hanson?
Wow, there are a lot of people here. I'm going to be pretty. Hey, Dan, Lisa. I'm going to be pretty brief in my opening comments, so I do encourage you to text in questions because I really want to talk about what is important to you. So let me pray for us, and then I'll give a few opening remarks, and then I'm just going to sort of shoot to questions. So let's pray. Father, thank you for loving us, and thank you for your church that we get to be a part of, not because of anything about us, but because of your grace to us. Lord, I pray that you would just bless us with your presence, that we would be aware and sense your nearness, and that you would draw us closer to you. And as we come closer to you, help us come closer to each other. And Lord, where we have differences, I pray that your Spirit would overcome that and help us to love each other well. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So I'm very mindful of that my context is very different than your context. And so I want to acknowledge that right from the start. So for instance, with my congregation, I planted it. I've been the only pastor there. I've been there almost two decades. And so it's a very different situation. My congregation is fairly large, and it's a weird dynamic in that we have probably more people in the LGBTQ community in my congregation than all the other churches in my town put together. So this is sort of my church is kind of the hub where a lot of people come from that culture, and they're very much loved and valued, and it works. However, we would probably also be the most conservative Methodist church in our area. So it's a weird dynamic how do we do both? And what I found is that while it's difficult to do that on a global level, on a local level with relationships, it kind of works. Give you one quick story. I hadn't planned to do this, but I'll give you one quick story. So, which I think will make the point pretty well. So another thing we do a little bit different, we don't have members at my church. We have partners. But it's more than semantics, because membership in our culture sort of connotates privilege, where partnership denotes responsibility. So we have high expectations for our partners. If you come, it's just right wherever you are, we'll accept you right where you are. But to become a partner, it's like the bar is raised. So we expect you to give, we expect you to be in a small group, we expect you to serve, and we'll talk to you if you don't. It's kind of that deal, okay? So, and you can't just walk up and join. You got to go through some classes and stuff like that. So anyway, this class is going through a little while back, and at the end of the class, her name's not Mary, but I'll say Mary. Mary comes up to the lady that was teaching the class and says, "Hey, it just kind of occurred to me, I'm married to a woman. Is that going to be a problem?" So the person teaching the class said, "You probably should go talk to Jay about that." So she makes an appointment and comes and sees me. So she sits down and she tells me, hey, and she's been coming to the church. When somebody takes a step to become a partner at our church, they've been around a while. They're not brand new, so she's been around. So she says, "Hey, I'm feeling like God's calling me to be a partner in this church. I'm married. Is that going to be a problem?" And I said, "I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me." And she says, "Well, I'm asking you, can I join this church?" And I said, "Well, I think that's the wrong question. Let me give you a little background about what we believe." So I laid out to her the traditional stance that we believe that the Bible says that same-sex relationship are contrary to God's will. It's called sin, okay? It's no different than my sin, okay? I'm a sinner, and even as your pastor, I'm going to need you to show me grace and walk with me in grace, and I'm going to show the same grace to you. There's not levels of sin. But our church does believe that it's not God's will. And if you decide to join this church, we don't change our beliefs to fit what you want it to be. If you say you want to join this church, you are affirming and saying you support and believe what we believe. And so I guess my question to you is, do you really want to be a part of this church? And she said, "That's a good question. Let me think about that." And I said, "I see how it gets you in a spot there, and I want to be clear, and I don't want to trick you or anything." So that's kind of, she says, "Let me think about it." So she goes away. She comes back the next day. And she says, "You know what? This church loves me, and I love this church, and I've found Christ here, and I want to be a partner of this church." And I said, "Great, that's wonderful." And some people say, "Why in the world would she do that?" And I go, "I don't know, but thank the Lord she did." And she's still an active part of our church. So it's a weird dynamic in my context. Also, my leadership would have probably left a long time ago. My church, he's just saying we left on August 20th. That's because I finally said okay. It wasn't because I had to really talk them into it. They were like, "Why the heck are we still here?" But I'm like Methodist in my DNA. And if you cut me, I bleed Methodist. It's just part of who I am. And the thought of leaving, I realized that Methodism is much bigger than the United Methodist Church, but that's the only expression I'd ever known. Now, my father knew more than that, or does know more than that, but for me, it was very hard and painful. Part of me died to leave the Methodist Church. I grieved. The day we had the vote, the weekend, we had a vote on Sunday, I couldn't get out of bed all weekend, because I was so down and depressed that we were having to take this step. But my dad probably said it best when they asked him with my board. He said, "It's an unfortunate necessity. It's time." And so we took that step. So I would say this to you. I'll give you some rules that I have. These are just my rules. They're not in the Bible. They're just Jay's rules. But they're pretty good for decision making. Number one, make sure the right people are making the decision. So in my church now, I used to have like 4 campuses. We've spun them all off into other things. So it's a pretty big operation. And my job is no longer to make decisions. My job is to make sure the right people are making the decisions and that they have the right information. That's my job. So it's real important for you to know that your church needs to make this decision. And I applaud what y'all are doing and having this process of listening and learning. The guy that's coming, he was talking about, Ben Gosden. Ben Gosden is a close friend of mine. I talked to Ben. It would be a preacher exaggeration to say every day, but at least every week. For those of you who were at annual conference or heard about it, that was a pretty intense time. And I was like right at the point of it, and it was difficult. And Ben would be on the other side, I guess you'd say. Ben and I would meet in the mornings and go work out together. I mean, we're hanging out, we're going out to eat, we're friends. And matter of fact, Wednesday night, he and I are going to be doing this at another church together. So Ben will have a lot of great stuff to say. So make sure that the right people are making the decision. Make sure that everybody understands the process. And part of that is making sure you're well informed to make the decision. Don't make the decision prematurely. Make sure you're getting information and you're thinking it through. So for instance, at my church, the way we did it, like I told you, my board was like, what are we waiting on? Well, you're waiting on me. That's what you're waiting on. And so once we decided, our board's decision was this: let's begin the process of exploration. This is real important. Beginning the process of exploration is not making the final decision. It's just beginning. So from that point on, I had tons and tons of meetings with literally hundreds of people. I had big meetings, I had small meetings, I had lunch meetings, I had dinner meetings, I had breakfast meetings, I had people at home, I had individual meetings, lots and lots of talk to listen and to answer questions that people had, but also to hear their heart. And then I went back to the board and said, and the board members were invited and the staff were invited to sit in with that. And then we said, okay, we've listened, we got a pulse on the people. I think we want to proceed with the vote. If we had listened and our church was not on the same page, then we would have said we're not going to. Starting the process does not necessitate that you go to the vote. It's just starting the process. And then you do this. You have lots and lots of conversations. And at some point you may go, I don't think we're going to do this. Or you may decide, yeah, we are going to move to the vote. And then, so our church did vote. Interestingly, I was like, I think I know how it's going to go. But the night before, I was like, it wouldn't surprise me. You know, it really kind of depends on who shows up. And a lot of people are out of town. And so I don't know. Ended up being like 97% in favor of going. So it was overwhelming majority. But even with that kind of majority, you just don't know. You just kind of, you think, but it's unnerving. It's really turned out to be believe it or not, a blessing for our church. We had honest, real conversations across differences, and while we didn't always get to the place where we agreed, we grew in respect for each other. We grew in love for each other. Our relationships actually got closer. I had two people. I had after we had the vote, I've had two people who emailed me and said that they no longer want to come to our church or remove their partnership. Actually, neither one of them had been in multiple years. But they were both very dear friends of mine for 30 plus years. And so it was, statistically was not significant, but personally was very painful. And I grieve it deeply. One of them said that she no longer identifies as a Christian. So for her, it's not about this issue. It's much bigger things going on, but I love her. And that's tough. And she's going through a lot, and she's separating from the church. But she's not separate from me. We still have a relationship. It's not limited to the church. So that gives you a little bit of the background for us. So we decided, actually for our church, the difficulty was not in deciding to leave. It was deciding to where do you land. And this is just my thoughts. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not trying to sell y'all on anything. But you have two separate decisions. One is, do we disaffiliate or not? And then if you are considering disaffiliating, you need to think about where you're going to land. And you shouldn't jump until you know where you're going to land. And that's where my church was a little bit more not unified at first. And so what we ended up deciding to do is to land in the Global Methodist Church, partly for pragmatic reasons of going, it doesn't cost anything to get in, it doesn't cost anything to be in, and it doesn't cost anything to get out. So we can go there and take our time in thinking through where we ultimately want to be. So it gives us several years to go, does this fit for us or not? I want to say one little bit about the Global Methodist Church. I'm probably not going to talk about that too much. If you decide you want to disaffiliate, I'll be glad to come back and tell you more about that possibility, but you got to make your decisions in order, if I would. So where the Global Methodist Church came from, the protocol, which was a mediated way to try to peacefully do this, which is now in the ditch, but before it allowed for a conservative branch of Methodism to be formed. But what happened was lots of different groups began to look at forming that river. So you had all these different streams that were forming. So there was a bishop, Bishop Scott Jones, who got 10 bishops and 10, there are all these caucus groups that are there's liberal caucus groups and there's conservative caucus groups. And so he got 10 representatives from all the different conservative caucus groups to meet in Atlanta. And he invited what he called 10 fresh voices, 10 people that were kind of didn't have a dog in the fight. They were kind of more objective. And I got to be one of those fresh voices, one of those 10 people. So these 30 people gathered in Atlanta, and our bishop at the time was there, and it was as much like Pentecost as I can imagine. I mean, we got there, and everybody was kind of sitting in their groups, and all the bishops and all the people were kind of jockeying for position and stuff, and then God just kind of moved and everybody laid down their terror. Matter of fact, I said, I think we're wasting our time here. I told him, I said, this is ridiculous. You're scripting too much. Just let God move. So he went and he got Bishop Jones and says, this kid has something he wants to say. And I said, I think you're doing this all wrong. And he says, well, what do you think we should do? I said, I think there's more unity here than you realize. I say, send some people upstairs and nail down where our differences are, and let's see if God can move. So he says, okay, here's the microphone. You speak to them. So I get up and I talk to this group, and they say, let's do it. So we selected some people, and they went upstairs, and they came back down, and they said, there's just going to be one movement of God for Methodism, and it's going to be the Global Methodist Church, and all the streams came into one river, and it just happened. And it was awesome. And the divisions fell, and they came together, and then they formed a group from around the world, Africa, Russia, Philippines, that are helping to birth that. And I got to be invited to be a part of that group. So every Monday morning, I meet with people from all over the world to get to be a part of this next move of God through the Methodist Church, which I love so dearly. So that gives you a little bit of perspective of where I'm coming from. My context is very different than yours, and I realize that, but I think I'll be able to answer your questions because I'm at least in the room when all these things are being discussed, I guess I'd say. So what's your first question back there for me?
All right. So the progressive agenda, Jay, is to change the book of discipline, right? They've been working to do that for close to 40 years. Will they succeed in doing that in 2024 or the near future?
It would be a speculative answer. I don't know. They may or they may not. It depends on a lot of things. I think that you could look at mathematically as the delegate ratio changes, it's possible, but I don't know. It would just be a guess.
Okay, I think the person's goal with that was trying to figure out if it's not going to get changed, then why move?
So I see a lot of stuff going around about misinformation and a lot of pushback on the Global Methodist Church and saying that we're saying that doctrines and disciplines are going to change. And I'm certainly not saying that, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think I think the bigger question is going, it doesn't really matter what the discipline says. They're going to do whatever they want to do anyway. So it's a moot point because they're going to go ahead and do the things they're going to do regardless of what it says. So you're wasting time to worry about what it says because that's not what they're operating by. Now, that's true now. So I think that's the answer is going. So for me, I'm like I said, I mean, some of my wives and my best friends are gay and lesbian people. That's part of my culture. Okay, I don't have much. I'm not very prudish when it comes to sexual stuff. That to me is a very small reason for me. The reason for me to leave the United Methodist Church is this way. So health. Any doctors, nurses here? So my favorite, good, because this may not be technically accurate. But my favorite definition of health is this. Health is not the absence of disease or germs. Rather, it is the presence of an effective immune system. So what that means is your body is always being exposed to germs and disease. But when you're healthy, it fights them off. Problems are not a problem as long as you have a mechanism to solve them. The difficulty the Methodist Church has is we have problems we don't have a system to solve. It's fatally flawed. We cannot solve these problems. We are at a dead grid lock. And I've been there and I've been trying through General Conference time and time again, and the problems cannot be fixed because of our system. And for me, I'm going, that's the thing that's difficult to me. The second thing is I've lost trust in the leadership. And the way I operate, you got to trust your leaders or you got to get off the boat. It's just a matter of integrity for me. So those are the issues. The third would be, which kind of ties to the first, but when you have rules, which we do, we have rules, but we can't enforce consequences. So when you can't enforce consequences on the rules, you don't have rules, you have suggestions, and therefore you have chaos. So we have a fatally flawed system with leadership that I don't trust, with chaos. And so I'm going, it's time for me to, in peace, part. So that long answer.
No, that was good. So that goes to one of the other questions. We don't have a structure, I think you just said, that would allow us to get rid of wayward bishops. Is that one of the things that, from a traditionalist perspective, the question is, why do we have to leave? If the traditionalists have the majority of the church, why do the traditionalists have to leave? And so then that question kind of went into, can't we get rid of the progressive folks who keep pushing us this way?
No, you can't get rid of the bishops. They're elected for life and they're in. They do retire, but you can't get rid of them. And I don't think you want to start kicking people out. That's not grace-filled. So, I'll answer the question this way. So our last bishop asked me this question. He says, Jay, what do you need to do now to be perceived 10 years from now as a person of peace? And so here, for me, in the church, I don't really care what the liberals think of me. I don't really care what the traditionalists think of me. What I worry about is what the lost people think. The people that are not in the church, that are watching the witness of the church. That's who we need to be reaching. If you're in here, you're going to end up in heaven. That's fine. It's the people out there that we need to have a witness to. And our church is at war with itself, and that is a horrible witness. But here's where I came to be a person of peace. If I'm not hitting you, okay, I'm not hitting you, but you keep punching me, they think we're fighting. So I have two ways to end the fight: kill you or walk away. And I'm not going to kill you. So my only way to be a person of peace is to go, I gotta walk away. That's turning the other cheek and leaving. So that's why it would not be a grace-filled action to say, kick people out of the church, you can't be here anymore. The grace-filled way is to say, take it, I'll go down the street. So that's why the traditionalists are leaving, because the liberal side is not going to. They're not going to. And the reason they're not going to is in their DNA, they're social reformists. They want to reform society, which is a good thing. That's I applaud that. And they believe sincerely. This is their sincere belief of looking at scriptures. They're not mean-spirited, negative, horrible people. Their understanding leads them to believe that to not do same-sex weddings and to not ordain self-avowed practicing homosexuals is causing harm to people. It's hurting them. So they have to stop you from doing that because you're harming people. So they can't just walk away and allow you to keep harming people because that's bad. Obviously, if you felt like that, you would want them to stop doing that too. So that's why structurally, they're not going to walk away. They have to change the system because the system is causing harm. I view it differently, but I understand that logic, and it makes sense to me. So that, for me, goes, okay, then I'll leave. Yeah.
Okay. Some of these questions have to do with kind of that time period if First Methodist here in Thomasville was to disaffiliate before they joined another denomination or whatever. There's that in-between time, and people have some concerns like how would we navigate a potentially lengthy period without a governing book of discipline?
Yeah, that's a great question, and whoever asked that question, I applaud your forward thinking. That's a very wise thought process. And I think, there's a lot of independent churches. There are a lot of independent churches, and a lot of the churches that are leaving want to go independent. That's just not the way I'm wired. I'm connectional. I'm Methodist. It's in my DNA. And it would be very, it's not a simple thing to come up with what you believe. And then how often do you rethink that? I mean, every month we got to redo what we believe and all our different poly and stuff. That's why my church is going, we're going to land the Global Methodist Church, which is basically all the same doctrine and stuff that we believe currently. But it gives us time to think through and decide, do we want to go independent or Wesleyan or Nazarene or whatever? You don't have to be hasty in that decision. So that would be my thing, is to find some sort of covering that you could be under while you worked out all those details. Because it's more complicated than you think. There's more involved there. And you need to have some sort of covering. Even if you decide to go independent, I would encourage you, get in some sort of network or some sort of association where there's some outside accountability and supervision there. I would encourage you to do that.
So are you saying that your church chose the Global Methodist Church? Is the Global Methodist Church actually established enough to provide that covering?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I'll meet tomorrow. As a matter of fact, one reason I'm spending the night, because I have a meeting every Monday morning, and every Monday we take in. Matter of fact, this is pretty amazing. So South Georgia is actually the first provisional annual conference in the Global Methodist Church in the United States. Which right now you're kind of like, it's not a big deal. 100 years from now, that's going to be something that our geographic territory is very proud of the heritage. This will be the mother annual conference of the Global Methodist Church in the United States. Now there's already one in some other countries, but as far as the United States, and we'll probably approve some more tomorrow. But every Monday morning I meet, we accept pastors, we accept churches from all over the globe into the church. So yeah, it's operating, it's running.
Okay. With so many churches disaffiliating, will the UMC have to restructure? If so, what are the chances we will be moved under a progressive bishop like Sue Halpert Johnson in North Georgia?
Yeah, my answer would just be speculative on that. So I hesitate to answer. I do think that it's going to restructure regardless. This may expedite the process, but it's, we've cut our budget in South Georgia 38% in the past 10 years. The last 10 years. So that's not just here recently. So it's cutting. I mean, there's a trajectory there. And so it's not going to go away. The South Georgia Conference is not going to collapse and crush. It probably will. The geographic bounds probably will begin to expand and include other areas, which is not a bad thing. It's just a scale deal. So I wouldn't be fearful of that or horrible. Bishop Sue is a brilliant woman. She's clear about what she's doing, and her strategy is in line with what she's trying to do. There's no hypocrisy there. She's clear with what she wants. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But I do think this. So I got in the car to come here. I live in Brunswick, and if I want to go to Savannah, I need to go north on 95. If I want to go to Jacksonville, I need to go south on 95. Okay? If I'm going to Savannah, it's foolish to go south on 95. I'm not going to get there, okay? The Methodist Church is going to move more liberal. There's nothing, that's not a bad, horrible thing. And if that's the direction you want to go, rock on, that's great. Or if that's not the way you want to go, then you need to go on a different route. And that's not, nobody's bad, nobody's evil. Jacksonville and Savannah are both great towns. But you as a church need to say which way are we going to go, because this road's going that way and this road's going that way. Hey, I think they set it for 6 o'clock, so I want you to know I'm going to try to give quick answers to get through as many as possible, and you'll certainly be able to leave at 6. I'm spending the night here tonight, so I'm going to stick around, and if you have questions afterwards, I'll stay here and answer questions. Well, it's been a long day. I won't stay all night, but I'll stay a long time.
So when these churches who vote to disaffiliate, what happens to the pastors of those churches?
So it depends. Most of them, the pastor is disaffiliating with them. So most of the time when I get my list, I'll get it tonight for my meeting tomorrow, and it'll have a list of churches and a list of pastors, and most of the time they go together. In the United Methodist Church, you have guaranteed appointments. So if a church was to disaffiliate and the pastor did not want to, they would just be assigned to another church.
The trustees of the South Georgia Annual Conference extended the deadline to disaffiliate until December 2024. Would there be enough time to meet that December 2024 deadline to disaffiliate if we waited until after General Conference to make a decision? And to go with that, could General Conference 2024 take away the ability to disaffiliate and keep our property?
Yeah, General Conference could do, they could. Technically what happens, so probably if there is a General Conference in 2024, it would probably be in May. The normal flow is it's in May, and then your annual conference is in June. And normally what happens in General Conference that year doesn't take effect till next year. So that's the normal sort of flow of things. So technically, if you're hoping something happens in 24, technically it wouldn't affect your disaffiliation until 2025, which the trustees' little agreement would be gone. So it could push you beyond that. I think they could make an exception to that. If they wanted to, they could say, we're going to make a decision and we're going to go ahead and make it effective now. So they could do that if they wanted to.
Okay. I think that part of that was that for us, at least, it seems to be a very long process, right? You have a certain number of days that you have to do the vote, and then you have to meet this deadline to, like, if this church were to disaffiliate in 2023, they have to have that in writing and have the vote and everything done by April this year. So
it's important that this is important. Y'all really need to make sure that everybody understands the process, and the process is implemented differently. And I'm not sure what district y'all are in, but it's well, I know who your bishop is. Yeah, so but it plays out a little bit differently in different districts. But basically, here's the way it goes. Okay, and so in order to be able to disaffiliate next June, which is the next chance that if you wanted to, you can't do it before June. Okay, to do that, you have to have voted by April 1st. You have to have had your church vote by April 1st, and you have to publicize the vote basically 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the vote happens. So if you're going to vote on the 14th, on the 1st, you've got to start publicizing it, okay? But before that, you have to have an informal conversation with your DS. Some DSs are doing it with the leadership. Some DSs require the whole place to be there, okay? Before that, you have to notify them that you are beginning to explore the process, okay? Here's the catch. So when you tell your DS, we would like to begin exploring the process and have a called church conference. When you say you want to have a called church conference, they have an extended period of time. They have a window in which they can do that. Now, typically, they do it pretty quick, but technically, they have a window to do that. And as things get more and more tense, it's harder to trust everybody's goodwill will remain. So to be safe, you need to make sure you notify them in enough time. This is what happened in Mount Bethel. Okay, the church in Atlanta that ended up spending $13 million in the law deal. What happened was they notified, they sat on it until the time passed, and then that's where it hit. So it can happen. Do I think that would happen in South Georgia right now? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Will it happen in the future? I don't know. Things are heating up, and people are not being. I can't say everything that's going on, but it's. Everybody's not playing nice. I'll just put it that way. And I'm afraid that's going to increase just people's feelings get hurt. And, when we're hurt, people hurt people. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. Just in their pain, they lash out and do things. So what that means is really you're pushing it all the way back to the end of this year when you need to start making a decision if you want to. That's like, you could wait longer than that, but it's a risk-reward deal. How much risk are you okay taking? And part of that is, how well y'all get along with your DS and stuff. If it's really good, then you're probably fine. Yeah.
Okay. I'm getting everybody's texting me right now, Jay. They're getting me some good questions.
That was kind of a complicated answer, so.
Yeah. So. Is it possible for the entire South Georgia Conference to disaffiliate?
Golly, man, that's the question. So for me, that's what I have been working for 6 years, probably 8 years. That I did not want my church to vote. I did not want my church to vote. And it ticks me off because the number one rule is do no harm, and not letting annual conferences vote does harm in churches all across this country. It's unnecessary. But the Judicial Council ruled, I don't think correctly, but they ruled and they said that we cannot vote as an annual conference until the general conference. So there's this big thing in Methodism, is it say may or shall? So there's the book of discipline say may or shall. If it says shall, you have to do it that way. If it says may, you can do it that way. What the discipline says, or the rule says, is church annual conferences by default have the right to vote it's actually withdraw from the United Methodist Church. And the general conference may establish the guidelines by which that happens. It says may. But they ruled it as a shall and said you can't do it until General Conference meets in 2024 and lays out the process for that to happen. And they can do that if they want to. Are you following what I'm saying when I keep saying want to? Yeah, they don't want to. That's not going to happen. That door is not going to be swung wide open. It's going to be locked. Now that's speculative. I'll own that. I don't know that for certain. But there is a pattern of behavior that leads me to that conclusion. I'm not just pulling it out of a hat. So, yes, it's possible that the protocol, some people are saying the protocol cannot be voted on. That's technically not true. The protocol has been submitted. It can come before. Theoretically, it's possible for the protocol to pass. Politically, it's dead. It has no backing. It's not going to pass. Theoretically, it could. Theoretically, General Conference could go back and say an annual conference can vote. We did a survey of our annual conference. 80% of the churches wanted the annual conference to vote to disaffiliate, to withdraw, and they would join. 80% of them. They're not going to swing that door open if they know 80% of the churches are going to leave. It just doesn't make any financial sense. So, yeah. Is that all of them?
Yeah, right, Jay. I am trying to kind of boil these. Some of them are cross-pollinating here. So it sounds like this person, they see what's going on down in Florida with the 106 traditionalist churches who are suing the conference because they feel like because they feel like the disaffiliation is actually punitive. They should let them go with their properties because they want to. And so it sounds like they're asking, why aren't we instead joining a suit like that?
I don't think that there is, there's no one organizing trying to do that, and I suspect if that was going to have to happen, it would be me, and I'm not going to do that because the Bible says you're not supposed to sue each other, and so I'm not going to. That's a bad witness. I don't mean to throw the people in Florida doing what they feel is best, so I mean no disrespect to them, but I'm just going. I'm not tearing the church apart and going. I'm not doing that. I'll just take my marbles and go down the street and play blessings on them. I don't think that's a good. And I talk to the people down there, and I tell them I don't think it's a good strategy, and I think it's going to drag out forever. And I'm not sure that this recent judicial council ruling doesn't nullify that anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I just don't have the stomach for that.
Okay, so I want to get this one because this person is really passionate, and they sent me a lot of text messages. So some of the things when you kind of wade into this dispute, that they say that the issue is about more than just human sexuality, that there are actually a lot of other things that the progressives believe. And I don't like this question because I feel like it tries to lump every progressive into one thing, but they seem to have concerns that say, how true is it that some of this progressive side of things doesn't believe things like the virgin birth or the divinity of Christ, the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ? Is that propaganda or is that real?
So I think this is an opinion answer, but I think it's a little bit of maybe a grain of truth that propaganda kind of blows up. Most of the time that I see people saying that people are saying that, it's the progressive side saying that the conservative side is saying these things. But I'm going, where are they saying that? I've never heard anybody say that. I'm not following. I'll give you a good example, okay? This is a true story that makes good sense. So I'm in a meeting so I used to be on the conference staff for a number of years in addition to pastoring the church. So I'm in this meeting with conference people, and that comes up. They said that there are pastors in South Georgia that are making false claims about the United Methodist Church, to which I said, I just find that hard to believe. I just can't believe that, And they said, no, it's true. And I said, well, do you know? And they said, oh, we know who it is. And I said, well, then you tell me, and I will go to their house and take care of this, And then they told me who it was, and I said, I don't believe that. I know this person, and I know how smart they are, and they would know that's not true. I don't believe that. And they said, it's in writing. It's published in an article. And I said, okay then. I said, you send me the article, and I will go meet with this person and deal with it. They didn't send me the article, so I emailed them back and said, hey, send me the article, and I will go. So they sent me the article, and I read the article. The whole article. He did not say that. That is not what he said at all. He said that there are bishops and there are different people who have made these statements, but he did not say that that was a shift of the Methodist denomination, that the church believed that. There are isolated rogue people who have said that, to which I then called the people who made the accusations back up, and I said, hey, you are maligning a guy and saying he said things that he didn't say. I read the article, and you know what they said? Oh, I didn't read the article. And so there's that kind of spin that happens. So typically what's going on is, are there people that don't believe in the virgin birth? Yes, there are pastors in South Georgia that don't believe in that. That doesn't mean the Methodist Church doesn't believe in that, So you can't just paint everybody in these broad strokes and say the Methodist Church is gone heretic and that we're rogue. Are there those in it that do? Absolutely. But they're making too big a deal. They're isolated. Now, it is a little bit concerning when you have bishops. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm just saying it's unfair to say that against the whole denomination. That's not accurate. That's where the propaganda part gets in there.
Okay, so tell me, I know that you don't want to delve too far into the Global Methodist Church, but here are some of the questions pertaining to that. You know, what will the GMC look like? Like, what are the major differences? Someone else said, you know, we currently pay a significant amount of money in apportionments to the Methodist Church.
I got the question. I'll go with it. So
Okay.
here are the basic differences, okay? And they're going to seem subtle to you, but they're huge. The first one deals with apportionments, okay? So apportionments, the way the United Methodist Church figures out apportionments is the general church figures out what it wants to do, how much it'll cost, and then they apportion it out to everyone and say, this is what you owe as part of it, okay? The Global Methodist Church inverts the whole thing and says this. It says you give, and they set it at a maximum of 5% and a maximum for the annual conference, which the annual conference gets to decide that. They just can't go over 5%. They can do below. And the general church can go up to 1.5% of your operating budget. Whatever comes into your church and you spend, then out of your generosity, you give that to connectional giving. It's not an apportionment, it's connectional giving. So and then the church says, based on what you're able to give, we'll figure out what we can do, which is exactly the way your church works. I mean, your church comes in and gives, and then when the money that comes in, your church figures out what ministry it can do. So it inverts the paradigm from a top down to a bottom up, so that the churches are saying, this is what came in, so this is what we can give. You know, if it doesn't come in, then you don't have to give because it didn't come in. Just like with you. You tithe. If you make no money, then you can't give. That's one shift. Another shift, which is really huge, is there's no guaranteed appointment. Okay? So in the United Methodist Church, if you're an elder, you're guaranteed an appointment. Now, here's what that means, and you know better than I do. They got some duds they got to play somewhere. I mean, I'm just being honest, you know. And so your church is going to have to take its turn eventually because they got to play that card. Well, what that does is it erodes the trust between the church and the denomination. You can't trust the appointments. So in the Global Methodist Church, there's not guaranteed appointments. So if a person is not an effective pastor, they're not saying they're not great people, they're not godly. This is just not your calling for vocation. So we help them find another way, which means that they don't have duds they have to place, which means that you can begin to build trust with the system. Which for a church your size, I mean, this church has, and I know y'all have had some bumpy times in the past few years, but this church has great heritage. This is a great, strong church. This is a shining star. So you're probably not going to get the dealt bad hands, probably. Well, yeah. But some of them do. So guaranteed appointment is big. So the apportionment and the guaranteed appointment. And then the other big difference has to deal with bishops, okay? So a lot of times I get asked, can you guarantee that no one will break the rules in the Global Methodist Church? No, there's no way to do that. Can you guarantee that the consequences will be enforced? No, because you have to have a rule, you have to have consequences, and then you have to have people who are willing to enforce them. That's where we get into trouble, okay? So here's the Global Methodist Church way of dealing with that. Bishops will not be elected for life, okay? They are elected, if called to serve in that capacity for a season, then they go and serve, and then they go back and be the pastor of a local church. Why? Because if you're called to be the pastor of a church, don't stoop to be a king. There's no higher calling than being the pastor of a local church. So the Global Methodist Church won't even have DSs. They'll have presiding elders who serve a church. They're the pastor of that church, and then they provide oversight for others. They're an overseer, but they serve the local church. It's all about keeping as much human resource and financial resource in the local church. So for us, we have, we either pull our best pastors out of local churches and put them in DS roles, which you could argue your pastors who have a heart for and are gifted in doing that are not going to want to do that. So that means you take the less competent ones and put them over everybody, which is even more dangerous, you know. So you won't be elected for life. The DSs, presiding elders, serve local churches, and then the other component is global accountability. So the reason we get in difficulty in enforcing our rules is because it's geographic, it's jurisdictional. So if this jurisdiction goes rogue, there's nothing this jurisdiction can do to make them enforce the rules. But in the Global Methodist Church, it'll be the whole globe. So if somebody goes rogue, then Africa could come in and say, no, you can't do that and remove them. Even if there was some difficulty, though, at the end of their term, they're out anyway. So there's a built-in stopgap there. One similarity, so the appointment system in the Global Methodist Church will be an appointment system. It will not be a called system. Do y'all understand the difference between called? Yeah. So it will be an appointed system, but it will be high consultation, which what that means is that the bishop and the presiding elders will work with the church to find an appropriate match, and the church has a lot of say into that. In South Georgia, that happens for some churches. In some churches, it doesn't, and that's where I have a problem. It needs to be the same whether you're a big church or a little church, you know. Now, obviously, if the church is paying $5,000, they're not going to get the same person that a church is paying $10,000 is going to get. But they need to have the same level of voice in the process. And so South Georgia's fairly good about that. There are other conferences that are still back in the old school where they just tell you this is who's coming, you know. So this will be more, the church will have more voice. The church will have more power. It's all about getting it back to the local church. Those are probably the biggest differences.
So will the Global Methodist Church have the trust clause?
No, and that's yeah, absolutely. That's another thing. So there's no trust clause in the Global Methodist Church. So, and this is huge because basically with the trust clause, think about this.
All right, hold on. Make sure everybody's on the same page. What is the trust clause that we are currently under?
So the trust clause was established a long, long time ago with John Wesley so that there wouldn't be theological heresy taught in church. Basically, he didn't want the people with Reformed theology coming in and co-opting and stealing the congregations. So if that's happened, the denomination or the conference held the deed to your property so they couldn't take your church. So if a church wants to, you've always been able to leave the United Methodist Church, but you leave your building and all your assets, which means for the most part, you can't leave. So you're stuck, which gives the denomination all the power because you can't leave, okay? Without the trust clause, you have to give a 90-day notice that you want to depart the Global Methodist Church. Your church decides, hey, being a part of the Global Methodist Church is not beneficial for us. We're serving our 90-day notice, we're leaving. Which means all the pressure is on the Global Methodist Church to make it worthwhile for you to be in the Global Methodist Church. Because if it's not beneficial for you, you walk. So it's a complete power dynamic shift where all the power rises in the local church. And the denomination has to serve you, else you walk away. And there's no cost. So what we've decided now, right now, the South Georgia Annual Conference has 0 apportionments. And we're going to be having an event at Upper Potosi on October 15th and kind of launching the Provisional Annual Conference. My hope is that we don't set any connectional giving. We encourage churches to give generously as they're able, but there's no assigned amount. Right now, the global church, national or global giving is set at 1% of whatever your operating budget is. So that you take out like missions and facilities, it's just your operating budget. 1% of that. But all you have to do is say, and my church has done this, say we want to opt out of that. We want a waiver that says we don't have to pay anything. And then on Monday, that will come to me, and I will vote for your church to not have to pay anything. Now, my church is going to give lots of money to it because we believe in it, and we're generous people. But I don't really want them to tell me I have to give this. I want to just be able to free will give it. And I think my people will be more generous in doing that. So as it stands, it doesn't cost any money to get in the Global Methodist Church. It's a simple paperwork. You say that you voted to do it. It's a simple thing for the pastor to transfer in. It doesn't cost any money to be in the Global Methodist Church, so you can be there. It's not costing you anything. Now, hopefully, you'll be generous and give because there's going to be expenses. And if you decide to leave, it takes a 90-day notice and you can walk. So for my people, it's kind of like, well, that sounds like a no-brainer to me to have time to think about it. And it gives us this is what we believe, here's our policy, here's our practices, here's all the legal covering while we figure it out.
So real quick, and I could help you with the numbers, but can you go over real quickly how, if we were to disaffiliate, how would we get to keep our campus?
Well, if you disaffiliate now, in this window, that's what the disaffiliation policy allows you to leave, but you have to buy out. So you pay your past 12 months apportionments, which hopefully are are paid up in full or close to now. So you have to pay the last 12 months, which the way I told it to my people is, okay, so the last 12 months that doesn't factor into the decision because we've already paid that. So that's money already spent. And you have to pay your next 12 months of apportionments, which I told my people, we don't factor that in either because we pay that whether we stay or whether we go. We're still paying that. So that's not a new expense. So the only expense that is there is what's called your unfunded pension liability. Okay? So they give you a number that's your portion of the pension liability to cover if the stock market were to crash, they could continue to pay. And that fluctuates based on the bond market. So, and this is one of the factors that churches factor in to when they want to leave. So, so my apportionments at my church are about $120,000, $130,000 a year. So that's $260,000. Is that right? Yeah, of apportionment stuff. But I don't factor that in because I'm paying that anyway. So the number I'm looking at is my unfunded pension liability. Okay. So the first time I checked, and they do it every quarter, was $195,000. So, which is not a lot because my church is not that old and my salary is not as high as some, so it's based on that. So it's $195,000. One of the reasons why we disaffiliated in August was that it dropped to $60,000. So instead of paying $195,000, I only had to pay $60,000. I don't mind paying the apportionments. I don't mind that because that money's going into ministry. That money that you put in unfunded pension liability goes and sits in a bank and just waits in case something happens. It's just totally taken out of the game. And I want my money doing ministry. I don't want it sitting in a bank. So I'm not being stingy. I just want my money in the game, not on the sideline. So I wanted to go when it was as low as possible. Now, the bond market may work so that number goes down even more. So if you're willing to roll the dice, play it out. If not, then you look at it when it's going to be the lowest and you try to move at that time. I was in St. Mary's last week doing this, and Jeff Barker, who's the head of the St. Mary's Foundation, which is a big foundation, I had dinner with him, and this is what he said. He says, man, I know there's all types of emotion tied up in this. There's all types of emotion. And I guess there is some theology that's tied up in this too. But I'm a businessman. And when it comes down to business, it's a no-brainer. We disaffiliate, and we do so now. It's just a business decision for me. And I was like, well, it's more than that. But from that standpoint, he's got a point.
So our number as of March this year, we're current on our apportionments. So 1 year's apportionments based on our 2022 rate is about almost $108,000. Our pension liability calculated in March of this year is about $160,000, $1,500 in legal fees. The conference takes us a little bit, about $270,000 to disaffiliate and keep the property. Okay?
So that number that you took in March is probably half of that in June. So that was my second number. So they've updated them since March. So in June was the new number that our August deal, and that's where it had the huge drop. So that number's, but you can't get in on that number now. You missed that. So the next time you'll have to check again. It could go up or it could go down. It could go either way. But it's a significant swing. I mean, it's not. I mean, mine literally was a third of what it was.
So as soon as you mentioned that you were having a global Methodist meeting at Epworth by the Sea, this question popped up. What's going to happen to those properties like Epworth by the Sea, Vashti, some of these other United Methodist? Well, I don't think Vashti is United Methodist property anymore, but Epworth by the Sea and all these other common conference-held properties. What happens?
Like the Methodist Children's Home?
Yeah.
The Methodist Children's Home. Yeah. So they draw from everybody. They turn out great. They're going to get multiple streams funding into them. If you drive into Epworth by the Sea, y'all remember the old entrance to Epworth? I know Lisa does. Not the booth gate, but the main. You come through the oak trees. That's the best way to come in. Still, it's beautiful. When you go in there, you look at the sign that's been up there forever, and it says Epworth by the Sea, the Methodist Center. It's bigger than United Methodist. The United Methodist is one stream in what God is doing through the Wesleyan world. And so all those institutions are going to, I gave you a great example, Payne College. Payne College is a historically black college that we take a lot of pride in as being, part of the South. There's about 3 different denominations that claim them as theirs. And Payne just sits back and gets support from all of them. Rightly. That's a brilliant thing to do. So they're autonomous. They have their own boards and they operate. So they're going to be great. And that's part of the reason why I held the event for the Global Methodist Church at Epworth, because I'm going, we're not walking away from our heritage. We're going to continue to embrace and support that. And the Arthur J. Moore Methodist Museum came and met with me this week going, hey, we want to document and keep the history of this new thing that God's doing as part of our museum here. So absolutely, all those relationships continue.
Check. What was the main concern that your partners there at the chapel, what were their main concerns during all this conversation about whether or not to disaffiliate?
That our people felt loved and heard, and that we did what we did in a grace-filled, loving way, that people with whom we disagreed didn't feel like their church was against them, that it would still be the same, that this Sunday was no different than that Sunday, no different than last week. And after our vote, so I sent out a letter before the vote to all of our partners. I sent out a letter after the vote announcing it, and I said, we will speak of this no more. We're moving on to tell people about Jesus. And we did. And that Sunday, the Sunday after our vote, I didn't mention anything about it. There were a few people there wearing rainbow shirts, which was completely appropriate and not awkward at one bit. And I don't think they were doing it in a defiant, protesting way. And they sat right where they sat normally, right beside the people that they sat, and it was just a non-issue, and we moved on. But that was, I think, our concern for our board and our leadership, is just that we cared for and loved people well. My people are pretty good about having honest conversations. We'll wade in and not shy away from that, but they do it in a pretty grace-filled way. So,
does the Global Methodist Church already have a book of discipline?
It does, yeah. It's actually called the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline. It's on the webpage. The whole thing is there. It's really well done, too, because you can just search whatever you want to on there. I'll give you one example in a second. We refer to it as the Transitional because we haven't had a convening conference, and the convening conference, which is basically like a general conference, and people get all freaked out because they go, yeah, it says that now, but when you have your convening conference, they can change it. Yeah, like general conference can change it every year. That's the way it already is like that. That's nothing new there. So the thought is it may be tweaked a little, but the intent is that will for the most part, continue as is. I do want to say this because some people have reached out to me and says, this doesn't say we're against homosexuals. We got to be clear. And I'm like, no, we're not against homosexuals, okay? What it says is this. The Global Methodist Church's stance is this way. So you might have to help me if I get it a little bit wrong, but basically the United Methodist Church's stance is that we believe that all people are created in the image of God and are sacred worth, but that same-sex relationships are contrary to God's will, something maybe in its sin or something like that, which some people feel like is too harsh and harmful. Okay, so the way the Global Methodist Church says it is this: we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. Period. That's actually dealing more with polygamy than it is with same-sex. Globally, polygamy is a much bigger issue. So it's really it's about more than that. We believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. And we believe that God calls us to be faithful in marriage, in celibate and singleness. Period. That's our stance. And everything that's contrary to that, we don't support. We believe marriage between one man and one woman. And when you're single, you're celibate. So what does that mean about a person who has same-sex attraction but they're celibate? Great. That's it. It's no different than a heterosexual person who's single and attracted to women that doesn't act on it. There's no problem with that at all.
I just think it's important to note that at least 12 men turned to their wives in that moment and said, "Who could handle more than one?" Yeah. So this question, in the Global Methodist Church, are women able to take lay leadership roles take clergy roles. And I don't know, this one's interesting. An LGBTQ, are those people able to be hired as staff, or they're not? I don't think they're asking about ordained staff, just regular staff.
That's a great question. And one of the rumors that has just been like really rampant is that like women aren't going to be able to be ordained in the Global Methodist Church. That's just flat out not true. Matter of fact, I told you I meet with the it's called the Transitional Leadership Council for the people all over the world. Our chair of that global deal is a lady. I mean, so it's absolutely women will be ordained and serve in all types of leadership. There is one distinction I need to go back. So we have certified lay ministers in the United Methodist Church, which just came out of my office, and we will have certified lay ministers in the Global Methodist Church too, so they can transfer over just like a clergy person can transfer over. And so certified lay minister is the highest level of credentialing to be a lay person. Once you cross that line, technically you become a clergy person. However, you have deacons and elders, but there's this thing called licensed local pastors, which is we have a lot of licensed local pastors. The difficulty is licensed local pastors, not clergy or laity, which I'm pretty sure you're either pregnant or you're not. What is this hybrid deal here? And so in the Global Methodist Church, there will not be this hybrid thing of licensed local pastor. Everybody who's a licensed local pastor who transfers from the United Methodist Church to the Global Methodist Church will automatically become a deacon. Now, there will be some more educational opportunities for them to help them continue to grow, but you're either clergy or you're lay. And we want to empower laity and we want them doing ministry. But if they take the step to be in the clergy, it needs to be clear and you're full clergy with all the privileges and benefits of being so. Also a distinction right now in the United Methodist Church, you can be a deacon or you can be an elder. You remember when we used to go deacon and then elder. So the Global Methodist Church is going to do it that way. You'll become every elder will first be a deacon, and then those that feel called will go on to be an elder. So that's a little bit of difference. These are great questions.
Thanks. They're good. They're good people. What about this one? Did your church, and this will be the last one, Jace, did your church obtain legal counsel to walk you through this process?
That's a good question. Yes and no. We did not. We didn't go out and hire a lawyer, and a lot of churches are doing that, and. In my context, in my district, in my relationship with my district superintendent, it's a pretty peaceable, it's not adversarial at all. I do have a lawyer that's a close friend of mine and on my PPR committee, and we did send him the legal, when you got right down to signing the paperwork for the transfer of the deed and the title, he got involved in that aspect, but it wasn't like, that was just for the title transfer stuff. It wasn't like the whole legal process. So it's probably good to have a real estate lawyer that can kind of work through that, because basically it's like a real estate transaction. You're swapping the deed, and I would encourage you to incorporate so that it can be transferred if you're not already, to transfer it. So then you just transfer the title on the deed. It's pretty simple.
So somebody just wanted to make sure that the previous question where you talked about women in leadership roles, there was a second part about LGBTQ people being allowed to be staffers.
Absolutely. So, absolutely. My bad. Yeah. So LGBTQ we would not perform same-sex weddings, and they would not be ordained as elder. That's it. That everything else would be. I don't think they could be a deacon either. But that's a good question. But because of the sequence, I don't think that, because it's clergy, they couldn't be ordained either deacon or elder. Could be certified lay minister, could be different things. Now, different churches are going to probably do that, differently. For me, I'll give you one quick. Do I have time for one quick story? Okay. So here, and this is just, I'm just confessing with you. Okay, this is the struggle. And I have this conversation a lot. I don't believe, based on my understanding of Scripture, and I'm respectful and I appreciate other people. I don't believe that we should ordain self-avowed, practicing, that they're active in an active relationship to be elders, ordained. I don't believe we should ordain anybody to having an affair or living, not being celibate in singleness. All those things are there. I'm completely okay with a person that's in that being working in the coffee shop or being a greeter or a host. So somewhere there's a line. And I don't have a good, firm answer for that. And my board gets mad. They go, you got to make a definitive, this is it. And I'm going, it's different for different people. I mean, it's just, we pretty much have communion at my church every week. We do, not because we're saints, we're just really sinful, so we need it a lot. So I have two ladies. I'm not convinced they're gay, but I think they probably are, okay? But they're like 75 years old, and they're just the sweetest, neatest, and they're not pushing anything on anybody. This is not their identity that they're trying to go. It's a part of who they are, but it's not the totality of them. So they are head of one of the services for communion. I had another young lady, she came out, she left her husband. I mean, it's in your face. It's all over Facebook. She's just pushing it. And I told her, hey, I'm going to have to take you out of serving communion. Now, some people would say that's unfair, because you let them, but you don't let them. And I get it. But I felt like she was trying to take this as a platform and push it. Well, they're not doing that. They're just trying to mind their own business. I had a lady that they came to me and said, hey, there's this girl. She's really talented. She's really talented, plays a bunch of different instruments. She kind of wants to be in the band. I'm like, well, why are you talking to me? She's gay. And I said, okay, well, tell her to come talk to me. So she comes, she sits down in my office, and I said, tell me your story. She said, I love to play music, and I love to lead people, in worship. And I came out, and the church where I was on the worship team invited me in and told me I could no longer go to that church. And I said, I am so sorry for your pain. Did they buy your lunch? She said, no. I said, I would have bought your lunch. I said, I'm not trying to throw that church under the bus. Okay, they did what they did. That's okay. But I know that's a deep wound for you to feel like you have a gift from God that you can't use. She says, it is. I said, let me explain to you how I feel about it. So I gave her the talk. I think it's sin. I don't think it's what God wants for you. I don't think it's your best. It's no different than my sin. It doesn't make you any worse than me, And I said, so what are you asking me? And she says, can I be a part of your worship team? And this is what I told her. I said, I would absolutely love for you to be a part of our worship team. Because you standing back there playing the keyboards on stage with me gives a witness to some people that they can fit in and belong here too. I love the visual of you being. Now, some churches would say, no way. If she's on the stage, she's out. I said, absolutely. But I want to be clear with you, okay? I want to be honest. I don't want to bait and switch. If you ask me to move to the front of the stage and be the worship leader and start leading the sing, I'm not going to let you do that. And I don't want to trick you. She busted into tears. She hugged me. She said, that's more grace than I could ever hope for. And she was a part of her parents. Her parents started coming to our church because then their parents are still there. I was with them this morning. She's since moved away. She's now a guy too. But she found the love of Christ there, And we navigated that tension. And in conversation, it was grace-filled, and she felt loved and accepted. And we loved her well. And her girlfriend came to church with her. Now, some people would say, you shouldn't have done that, Well, maybe, but that's what I did. So, all right, do we need to? I'm going to stick around and talk if people want to, but you can dismiss them, and then I'll just stay here. Or
Carrie's going to close us in prayer. Thank you all for being here. Jay, thank you so much for being here as well.
No, I need Jay. Thank you all for being here and for being here so well, for your great questions. And thank you, Jay, for the time spent getting here, being here, and sharing your heart and your experience with our congregation. Let's pray together before we leave. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. In this moment, we give you praise and thanks and bow before your majesty. We thank you for the ability to stand together and to love each other in the midst of differences. We thank you for the one who comes, your Son who comes and speaks to us and shares from his heart. We ask, Lord, that you would bless him, and that as he leaves this place and travels home, that he would do it safely. He would sense your presence with him and your deep and abiding love for him. May all he says and does in your name and his place bring honor and glory to you. So, Lord, take us safely home. Give us hearts of love for each other. And we thank you for your deep and abiding love for us. It is in the precious and the holy name of Jesus the Christ that we pray. Amen.